surrounding themselves with servants, and despising physical or manual labor as unworthy of the nobility and aristocratic pride of the heroes of so many centuries, has led to their aversion to manual labor. Many Filipinos said to themselves, "The curate says that a rich man will not go to heaven. The rich man on earth is exposed to all kinds of vexations, to all kinds of trouble, to be appointed cabeza de barangay or head of the barangay, to be deported if an uprising breaks out, to be forced to lend money to the military chief of the town, who, in order to pay you for favors received, will seize your workmen in farm animals to compel you to beg for him clemency and thus very easily pays off. The Indu, whom they pretend to regard as an imbecile, is not so much so that he does not understand that it is ridiculous to work himself to death to live as he did." Add to this introduction of gambling, we don't mean to say that before the coming of the Spaniards, the Indians did not gamble. The passion for gambling is innate in adventurous and excitable races, and the Malayan race is one of them. Pigafetta tells us of cockfights and betting on Paragua Island. Cockfighting must also have existed in Luzon, and all the islands wherein the terminology of the game are found two Tagalog words, sabong, which means fight, and tari, gam. But there is not the least doubt that the government is responsible for its promotion and perfection, though Pigafetta tells us about it. He mentions only Paragua and not Cebu or any other islands in the south where he stayed a long time. Morga does not mention it, despite the fact that he spent 7 years in Manila, and he describes various kinds of fowl, wild hens, and roosters. Neither does Morga speak of gambling when he talks about vices and other defects more or less hidden, more or less insignificant. Moreover, with the inspection of the two Tagalog words, sabong and tari, the others of the Spanish origin like soltada, which means the act of setting free the cocks for the fight, and the fight itself, pusta, from the Spanish word apuesta or bet. Logra, which means winning, pago, which means payment, sentenciador, which means referee, and cased, which means to cover the bet, and etc. We say the same about gambling. The word sugal from the Spanish jugar, to gamble. Like confisal, confessar, to confess to a priest, indicates that gambling was known in the Philippines before the Spaniards. The Tagalog word lard or play not being equivalent to sugal. The word balasa from the Spanish barajar provides or proves that the introduction of playing cards was not due to the Chinese, who also have a kind of playing cards, because if it were so, it would have taken the Chinese name. So what more? The words tar or means talar, to bet, paris paris, Spanish pares, pairs of cards, politana, napolitana, a winning combination of cards, sapote, to stack the cards, capote, to slam, monte, a card game, and etc. All prove the foreign origin of this terrible plant, which only produces vice and has found in the character of an Indu as suitable soil fertilized by circumstances. Along with gambling, which breeds dislike for steady and difficult work by its promise of easy money and its appeal to the emotions with the lotteries, with the prodigality and hospitality of the Filipinos, went also to swell the stream of misfortunes, the religious functions. The large number of fiestas, the Lenti masses at which women spent their whole mornings, the novena, their afternoons, and the processions and rosaries their nights. Consider the lack of capital. Lack of means paralyzes all activity, and you will see why the Indu must perforce be indolent. For if any money might remain to him from the trials, imposed exactions, he would have given it to the curates for bulls, scrupularies, candles, and novena, and etc. And if this does not suffice to produce an indolent character, if climate and nature are not enough in themselves to daze him and deprive him of all the energy, then consider that the doctrines of his religion teach him to irrigate his fields during the dry season, not by means of canals, but with the masses and prayers to protect his animal during an epidemic with holy water, exorcisms, and benedictions costing 5 euros an animal to drive away the locusts with a procession led by the image of Saint Augustine and etc. Doubtless, it is good to trust greatly in God, but it is better to do what one can and not bother the Creator. So often, even when these importunities redound to the benefit of his ministers. We have observed that the Philippine peoples who believe most in miracles are the laziest, just as spoiled children are the most ill-bred. Whether they believe in miracles to lull their laziness or they are lazy because they believe in miracles, we cannot say. But the fact is that the Filipinos were much less lazy before the word miracle was introduced into their language. The facility with which individual liberty is curtailed, the endless worry of all people knowing that they are liable to a secret report, an administrative action, and to be accused of being a filibustero or rebel or a suspect. An accusation which need not be proven, or is the presence of the accuser necessary to produce the desired result, the lack of confidence in the future, the uncertainty of reaping the fruit of one's labor, as in a city in the grip of an epidemic where every individual yields to fate, shuts himself in his house, or goes about amusing himself trying to spend the few days that remain of his life in the least disagreeable way possible. The apathy of the government itself toward everything pertaining to commerce or agriculture contributes not a little to foster indolence. There is no encouragement at all either for the manufacturer or the farmer. The government gives no aid either when the harvest is poor, when the locusts lay waste the fields, or when a typhoon destroys in its path the wealth of the land, nor does it bother to seek a market for the products of its colonies. So why should it do so when the same products are burned with imposts and duties and have no free entry in the ports of the mother country, nor is their consumption there encouraged? While we see all the walls of London covered with advertisements of the products of its colonies, while the English make heroic efforts to substitute silent tea for Chinese, they themselves starting the sacrifice of their taste and stomach. In Spain, with the exception of tobacco, nothing from the Philippines is known, neither its sugar, coffee, hemp, fine textile, nor its placano blankets. The name of Manila is known only thanks to the shawl from China or Indochina, which at one time reached Spain by the way of Manila. Silk shawls embroidered fantastically but coarsely, which no one in Manila has thought of imitating, as they are so easily made, but the government is engrossed in other things, and the Filipinos do not know that in the peninsula such articles are more esteemed than their delicate pia embroideries. The fact that the best estates, the best tracts of land in some provinces, the more profitable ones because of their accessibility, are in the hands of the religious corporations whose desideratum is the ignorance and the condition of semi-richness of the Filipinos, so that they can continue governing them and make themselves necessary to their helpless existence, is one of the reasons why many towns do not progress despite the efforts of their inhabitants. We will be contradicted with the argument that the towns which are the property of the friars are relatively richer than those which do not belong to them, just as their brethren in Europe, in founding their convents, have chosen the best valleys, the best uplands for the cultivation of the vine or the manufacture of beer, so also the Philippine monks have known how to select the best towns, the beautiful plains, the well-watered fields, to make of them very rich estates. But they forget that in some provinces where they have not succeeded to get possession of the best tracts of land, for one reason or another, their estates, Baurang and Layang, are inferior to Taal, Balayan, and Lipa regions cultivated entirely by Filipinos without any monkish interference. Add to this lack of material inducement the absence of moral support, you'll see that in that country, one who is not lazy must be a fool or at least an imbecile. What future awaits one who distinguishes himself, who studies, who rises above the crowd? A young man becomes a great chemist through study and sacrifice, and after a long course of training during which neither the government nor anyone gave him the least help, graduates from the university and works. A competitive examination is held to fill a certain position. The young man, because of his knowledge and the perseverance, wins it, but after winning it, the position is abolished because we do not wish to give the reason. But when a municipal laboratory is clowned in order to abolish the position of the director, one is posed through a competitive examination while other positions, like that of prem censor, retain, it is because of the belief that the light of progress will hurt on people more than all the adulterated foods. In the same way, another young man wins a prize in a literary contest, and as long as his identity was unknown, his work discussed, the newspapers praise it and consider it a masterpiece. The sealed envelopes are opened, the winner turns out to be a Filipino, and among the losers are peninsulars, then all the newspapers extol the losers. Not one word of encouragement from the government nor from anybody for the native who fondly cultivates the language and literature of the mother country. Finally, leaving out many other more or less insignificant reasons, the enumeration of which would be interminable, we are going to conclude this very list with the principal one and the greatest of all, which is the education of the Filipino. The education of the Filipino from birth until the grave is brutalizing, depressing, and anti-human. The word inhuman is not expressive enough whether the Academy approves it or not. Let it go. Undoubtedly, the government, some Jesuits, priests, and some Dominicans like Father Benavides have done much by founding colleges, primary schools, and etc. But this is not enough. Their effect turns out to be less useful rather. For 5 or 10 years, the youth comes in contact with books chosen by the very same priest boldly declare that it is an evil for the Filipinos to know Castilian, that the Filipino should not be separated from his Carabao, that he should not have any further ambition, and etc. To discuss more the topic, may I give the floor to Ms. Monique Codera.
Thank you, Abby. So this is a continuation of chapter 4. In those 5 to 10 years, majority of the students have grasped nothing more than that no one understands what the book says, not even the professors themselves, perhaps. And these 5 to 10 years have to offset the daily preachment of their whole life. That preachment which lowers their dignity of man, which by degrees brutally deprives them of the sentiment of self-esteem, that eternal, stubborn, constant labor to bow the native's neck, to make him accept the yoke, to place him on a level with the beast. A labor aided by some persons, with or without the ability to write, which, if it does not produce in some individuals the desired effect, in others it has the opposite effect, like the breaking of a cord that is stretched too tightly. Thus, while they attempt to make of the native a kind of animal, that in exchange they demand of them with divine actions. And we say divine actions because he must be a god who does not become indolent in that climate, surrounded by the circumstances mentioned. Rizal stated that when you deprive a man then of his dignity, you not only deprive him of his moral strength, but you also make him useless even for those who wish to make use of him. Added to that, every creature has its stimulus, its mainspring. Man is his self-esteem. Take it away from him and he is a corpse. And someone who seeks activity in a corpse will encounter only worms. This, according to Rizal, explained how the natives are no longer the same as those of the time of the discovery, neither morally nor physically. Ancient writers like Chirino, Morga, and Collin take pleasure in describing the natives as well featured, with good aptitudes for anything they take up, keen and susceptible, and of resolute will, very clean and neat in their persons and clothing, and of good mien and bearing. Morgan then describes how others delight in minute accounts of their intelligence and pleasant manners, of their aptitude for music, the drama, dancing, and singing, the facility with which they learned not only Spanish but also Latin, which they acquired almost by themselves, added by Colin. Others, of their exquisite politeness in their dealings and in their social life. Others, like the first Augustinians, whose accounts Gaspar de San Augustine copies, found them more gallant and better mannered than the inhabitants of the Moluccas. All live of their husbandry, adds Morga. Their farms, fisheries, and enterprises, for they travel from island to island by sea, and from province to province by land. Rizal mentioned how the contemporary writers find that the native is a creature something more than a monkey, but much less than a man, an anthropoid, dull-witted, stupid, timid, dirty, cringing, grinning, ill-clothed, indolent, lazy, brainless, immoral, and so forth. Although these words might not have come from the Filipinos had already lost her pride and self-esteem because, as Rizal put it, they were already convinced that they could only attain happiness if they throw their dignity outside the window. To just lay aside his dignity as a rational creature, to attend Mass, to believe what is told to him, to pay what is demanded of him, to pay and to pay forever, to work and suffer without aspiring anything, without aspiring to know or even to understand Spanish, without separating himself from his Carabao, as that is the ideal native for the Spaniards. However, Rizal believes that the native or the Filipinos has still aspirations and they think to strive to rise. Now, let's move forward to Chapter 5. Limited training and education and lack of national sentiment. In this chapter, according to Rizal, all the causes of indolence can be reduced to two factors. The first factor is the limited training and education the Filipino natives receive. Segregated from Spaniards, Filipinos do not receive the same opportunities that are available to the foreigners. The very limited home education, the tyrannical and sterile education, and the few education centers have influenced and taught Filipinos to be inferior. Nurtured with the stories of anchorites who led a contemplative life and lazy life, the Filipinos spend theirs giving their money to the church in the hopes of miracles and other wonderful things. The Filipinos' will was hypnotized. Since childhood, all they have learned was to pray for whole hours in an unknown language, or worshipping without understanding and accepting beliefs imposed upon them without questioning. You can do more than old so and so. Don't aspire to be greater than the curate. You belong to an inferior race. You don't have any energy. They often say this to the child which has engraved in his mind, hence seals and shapes all his actions. Whenever a child tries to be anything else, he is then charged of being vain and presumptuous. Rizal then mentioned that in order for one to progress, it is essential that a revolutionary spirit should boil in the Filipinos' veins, since progress necessarily requires change. The second factor is a lack of national sentiment of unity among the Filipinos. Because Filipinos think they are inferior, they submit to the foreign culture and do everything to imitate it. Filipinos were dazzled with tinsel, with strings of multicolored glass beads, with noisy rattles, shining mirrors, and other trinkets, and in exchange they gave their gold, their conscience, and even their liberty. Filipinos have changed their religion for the rituals of another religion. They became clerks, devout, prayer-loving, acquired ideas of luxurious and ostentatious living without improving correspondingly their means of subsistence. Moreover, Rizal added that the lack of national sentiment breeds another evil, which is the scarcity of any opposition to the measures that are prejudicial to the people and the absences of any initiative that will redound to their welfare. A man in the Philippines is only an individual. He is not a member of a nation. Filipinos are deprived of the right of association and therefore is weak and inert. Few administrative posts that fall to the lot of the Filipinos led to the appointment of the most stupid and incompetent men to municipal posts as officials. They are submitting themselves to the curates and their superiors. The solution, then, according to Rizal, would be education and liberty. Without education and liberty, no reform is possible and no measure can give the desired result. Rizal emphasized that in order to do so, there should have no obstacles in the Filipinos' ways, that the many his climate and the situation of the islands afford be not augmented, that instruction be not begrudged him for fear that when he becomes intelligent, he may separate from the colonizing nation or ask for the rights of which he makes himself worthy. Since someday or other he will become enlightened, whether the government wishes it or not, let his enlightenment be as a gift received and not as a conquered plunder. Rizal desired that the policy be at once frank and consistent, that is, highly civilizing, without sordid reservations, without distrust, without fear or jealousy, wishing the good for the sake of the good, civilization for the sake of civilization, without ulterior thoughts of gratitude, or else boldly exploiting, tyrannical, and selfish without hypocrisy or deception, with the whole system well planned and studied out for dominating by compelling obedience, for commanding to get rich, for getting rich to be happy. Next, let's have the summary of factors and the analysis.
The indolence of the Filipinos is a study of the causes why the people did not, as was said, work hard during the Spanish regime. Rizal pointed out that long before the coming of the Spaniards, the Filipinos were industrious and hardworking. The Spanish reign brought about a decline in economic activities because of certain causes. First, the hot climate. Filipinos cannot be compared to Europeans who live in cold countries. Filipinos exert much more effort at work because of this climate. An hour's work under the Philippine sun, Rizal says, is equivalent to a day's work in temperate regions. Second, the establishment of the galleon trade cut off all previous associations of the Philippines with other countries in Asia and the Middle East. As a result, business was only conducted with Spain through Spanish period. Because of this, the small business and handicraft industries that flourished during the pre-Spanish gradually disappeared. Third, Spain also extinguished the natives' love of work because of the implementation of forced labor. Because of the wars between Spain and other countries in Europe as well as the Muslims in Mindanao, the Filipinos were compelled to work in shipyards, roads, and other public works, abandoning agriculture, industry, and commerce.
Fourth, Spain did not protect the people against foreign invaders and pirates. With no arms to defend themselves, the natives were killed, their houses burned, and their lands destroyed. As a result of this, the Filipinos were forced to become nomads, lost interest in cultivating their lands or in rebuilding the industries that were shut down, and simply became submissive to the mercy of God. Fifth, there was a crooked system of education, if it was to be considered an education. What was being taught in schools were repetitive prayers and other things that could not be used by the students to lead the country to progress. There were no courses of agriculture, industry, etc., which were badly needed by the Philippines during those times. Sixth, the Spanish rulers were a bad example to despise manual labor. The officials reported to work at noon and left early, all the while doing nothing in line with their duties. The women were seen constantly followed by servants who dressed them and fanned them, personal things which they owe to have done for themselves.
Seventh, gambling was established and widely propagated during those times. Almost every day, there were cockfights, and during feast days, the government officials and friars were the first to engage in all sorts of bets and gambles. 8. There was a crook system of religion. The friars thought that the naive Filipinos that it was easier for a poor man to enter heaven, and so they preferred not to work and remain poor so that they could easily enter heaven after they died. Ninth, the taxes were extremely high, so much so that a huge portion of what they earned went to the government or to the friars. When the object of their labor was removed and they were exploited, they were reduced to inaction. Rizal admitted that the Filipinos did not work so hard because they were wise enough to adjust themselves to the warm tropical climate. So these are the exact words that the Rizal said. On ours work under the burning sun, in the midst of pernicious influences springing from nature and activity, is equal to a day's labor in a temperate climate. Lastly, the lack of a national sentiment of unity among the Filipinos. From Rizal's last statement, a man in the Philippines is only an individual. He is not a member of a nation.
It is important to note that indolence in the Philippines is a chronic malady, but not a hereditary one. Truth is, before the Spaniards arrived on these lands, the natives were industriously conducting business with China, Japan, Arabia, Malaysia, and other countries in the Middle East. The reasons for this said indolence were clearly stated in the essay, and were not based only on presumptions, but were grounded in fact taken from history. Another thing that we might add that had caused this indolence is the lack of unity among the Filipino people. In the absence of unity and oneness, the people do not have the power to fight the hostile attacks of the government and of the other forces of society. There would also be no voice, no leader to sow progress and to cultivate it so that it may be reaped in due time. In such a condition, the Philippines remained a country that was lifeless, dead, simply existing, and not living. As Rizal stated in conclusion, a man in the Philippines is an individual. He is not merely a citizen of a country. It can clearly be deduced that from the writing that the cause of the indolence attributed to our race is Spain. When the Filipinos wanted to study and learn, there were no schools, and if there were any, they lacked sufficient resources and did not present more useful knowledge. When the Filipinos wanted to establish their businesses, there wasn't enough capital nor protection from the government. When the Filipinos tried to cultivate their lands and establish various industries, they were made to pay enormous taxes and were exploited by the foreign rules. It is not only the Philippines, but also other countries that may be called indolent, depending on the criteria upon which such a label is based. Man cannot work without resting, and if in doing so he is considered lazy, then we could say that all men are indolent. One cannot blame a country that was deprived of its dignity to have lost its will to continue building its foundation upon the backs of its people, especially when the fruits of their labor do not so much as reach their lips. When we spend our entire lives worshipping such a cruel and inhuman society, forced upon us by aliens who do not even know our motherland, we are destined to tire after a while. We are not fools. We are not puppets who simply do as we are commanded. We are human beings who are motivated by our will towards the accomplishment of our objectives and who strive for the preservation of our race. When this fundamental aspect of our existence is denied of us, who can blame us as if we turn idle? Now that ends our presentation. Thank you for listening.